In any case, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you everyone for being here with us. I know that the talks in this series were mostly about various cultural aspects related to children's literature. I'll take a slightly different path today, hoping you won't mind. I'll focus on the question why we always read picture books again. I aim to describe a theoretical journey towards a possible answer. So my plan is to pass through the following sections of this trip and share some examples with you at the stops. So there are 9 sections. In the title, I mentioned other related issues. I thought it would be useful to arrange them as questions, and I hope they lead us to the last one. Why is rereading inevitable, or rather mandatory, when we talk about picture books? Also, when talking about picture books, I understand them as a special kind of format, different from similar multimodal formats, such as the illustrated book. I'll also reflect on these 3 pairs of categories down here, which individual picture books may belong to. I believe many of us are familiar with Macaulay's Black and White as a complex picture book. So its spreads are divided into 4 segments, and we are cautioned about the confusing number of stories in it in the famous warning. Regarding other issues, even this one spread indicates various narrative perspectives, multiple strategies of communicating meanings, metafictive overlapping of events, and the need to reread the book over and over again to discover the links and paradoxical relations among the frames on its pages. We also realize that several categories can be applied to its various parts. Maybe a simpler picture book could be easier to analyze. Again, a famous title, Rose's Walk. Now, I need to explain that I started my research about this format hoping to explain how narrative perspectives work in narrative picture books. Yet, contrary to my expectations, the responses to the question about the number of stories which I could find were often confusing. I found different answers. Several authors claimed that there are 2 stories in Rose's Walk, the story of the hen and the story of the fox. Based on the same example, others claimed there are 3 stories in any picture book, the 3rd one being the combination of previous 2. This is correct, actually, metaphorically speaking, but it didn't seem consistent enough for a theory. Well, talking about the narrator and narrative perspectives brought even more confusing statements. Different roles were ascribed to verbal and visual codes, words, and images, as you can see here. Well, I think that this happened because some scholars adopted the definition of the narrative voice developed by Jeanette, who studied the semiotic aspects of literature, the art of words. It was not strange then to ascribe the role of the narrator, the voice, to words only. But this misguided picture book scholars so that they often ascribed only the perspective or point of view to visual narration. In the second quote, you can even see that the perspective is ascribed to the reader who understands the objectivity of images. For example, a picture book like this one with third-person verbal narration would inspire, for instance, this explanation. The narrative voice belongs to adults and the perspective to a child. Well, I believe this has to do with a typical reading event when an adult reads the words to a child while the child is looking at the pictures. This, of course, often happens, but we forget that both participants actually receive both verbal and visual messages during the reading. In any case, the perspective is again connected with readers. When words offer the first-person narration or homodiegetic narration, and the images provide a detailed scenery, we could expect a new explanation, like this one. We understand the need to introduce heterodiegetic or third-person narration, but it is certainly not in the words. What we get here is a larger narrative, whatever it would be, and visual narration still remains only implied. Sometimes simple sentences cause elaborate explanations which combine different categories. Here, the sentence, "He was very happy," seems to have several roles. In result, hardly anything is clear about the narration and the perspective. So, theoretical foundations, the next section. The way out of this was a better understanding of classical narratology, which also takes into account Chapman's contribution. He opened the doors to film and transferred the notions of narration and the narrator to other media, in addition to the purely verbal medium of literature. The transfer of contents among different media offers an even wider picture. Further, the leading researchers of Picturebook adopted the semiotic approach, and more recent publications on picture books contributed to the development of a simpler and more useful scheme. Some of the basic insights that served as starting points include the complex relationship between verbal and visual texts, understanding picture books as polyphonic texts, discovering the narrative structure in both words and images, and the idea of a dual readership consisting of adults and children. Of course, the idea of visual narration as an important aspect of narrative picture books was a logical and reasonable result. Furthermore, statements like these were not common, but were extremely revealing. They definitely put my nose in the right direction, so to say. Well, narratologists agree, narrator is an element of a narrative text. And is it mandatory? It depends on its definition. Narratology defines the narrator as a function or a role of selecting and organizing narrative information. It is not a person, but a technical term. Any narrative needs to select and organize information to become intelligible. Thus, we can talk about the myth of the narrative without a narrator, or the fallacy of the unneeded narrator. Based on this, the answer is yes. There is a verbal and a visual narrator in picture books. As we know, perspective, or the point of view, is one of the characteristics or parameters of narrator. It defines a narrative situation. Just a quick revision of Janet's simple set of narrative perspectives. In his view, perspective is called focalization. Only zero focalization is non-restricted. Internal focalization is achieved when the narrator focalizes narration through a character, through the knowledge that the character has. So having cleared this up, let's go back to Rose's walk. If we compare the verbal text of Rose's walk and the visual text, it is clear that the visual narrator is focalizing the narration through the heroine of, that the verbal narrator is focalizing the narration through the heroine of this story, Rosie. The fox is not mentioned in the verbal text because Rosie does not know anything about the fox. The visual narrator doesn't restrict narrative information and shows us everything needed to understand the whole story. But it remains the same story. No two stories are here. Let us now turn to dry theory again. Here is Chapman's original model of the narrative. As we can see, he uses the structure of a sign as a starting point. In fact, he uses a slightly more complicated model of sign, this one. It helps him show that the same story can be expressed in different media. Chapman's model closely follows this model of sign. In a narrative, story represents contents and discourse the expression. I have slightly reorganized the elements of this model, but the basic structure is the same. The new arrangement made it possible for me to recognize the common narrative structure, or the common core, which is the same in all narratives. Story, substance, and discourse substance are specific in different narratives. So all the narratives share the same structure, which is contained in this middle part of the diagram, and individual narratives add specific elements of the story and of the discourse to fill in the empty vessels of story and discourse forms. Well, these elements can be seen here. They are elements of the form of story and of the form of discourse. It is confirmed then that the narrator belongs to the discourse. Turning to substance, we can understand it as specific content which takes the form of a certain element of the story. For example, character is the form and Alice is the substance in Alice in Wonderland. The substance of discourse is the medium used to formulate and convey narrative messages. For example, words, images, film, music, dramatic performance, and so on. And also the voice, narrator, of course, kind of narrator. So, based on this information, we now understand that the narrative picture book has two discourses and two narrators. They tell the same story. Generally speaking, any picture book has two voices engaged around the same theme. Well, this is then the semiotic model of narrative picture book, based upon the general model of the narrative and taking into account specific features of the picture book format. It helps resolve the problem of confusion we witnessed before. Let me explain it further. So, two discourses are combined with one story. They are separated but interdependent. What we see here is the general common core which all the narrative picture books are based upon. Two discourses give space for two narrators which tell the same stories. And regarding perspectives, we get two sets of narrative perspectives which belong to their respective narrators. And just as in other narratives, the perspective, or rather to say, just as in other discourses, the perspectives tend to change within the same discourse, and they are rarely constant. It's not like that in Rose's work, but generally there are variations. Now, to non-narrative picture books. The elements of forms, of contents and expression are different here. I have replaced story with knowledge, and I have also introduced the term utterer to denote a non-narrative voice equivalent to narrator. So every discourse has an utterer in non-narrative picture books. Each non-narrative picture book has two utterers. The semiotic model of the non-narrative picture book is established in analogy to the basic model of the narrative picture book. In both categories, two voices offer information. Their discourses may be equally demanding and rewarding. Now I'll show a few examples of such non-narrative picture books to get a bit of a rest from dry theory. So some of these picture books are old, some are more recent, and this implies that the format is consistent throughout time, which I strongly believe. Here, a rich visual discourse invites readers to explore it. In this ABC book, poems mention some words beginning with K and L, and images show objects named by such words. However, only some words are repeated in both sets. The objects around the letters represent words again, but some of the objects can be named by different words, still beginning with the same letter. This ABC invites the reader to physical exercise, I guess. The back cover of this ABC book shows a man reading it in a metafictional joke. It is similar here, only the detail of the boy reading the same book on the front cover is also an example of mise en abîme, and another example of metafiction is the detail of a torn page. The child is looking at us across the borderline of fiction and reality. Now, this is perhaps a short digression. Still, I think it is relevant for the semiotic models. It explains why it was only necessary to develop 2 models of picture books. So, and individual picture books may belong to different categories among these 6 or 3 pairs. Well, and what's more, it seems all these combinations are possible. So we all know that picture books are extremely flexible and prone to experimentation, and they are open to new experiences, breaking rules, crossing the lines, and so on. So I'll show you some examples of somewhat unusual combinations. For instance, here you can see an ABC with images of fictional characters. So these characters are not realistic, but fantastic. So we can also discuss the categories of such picture books, and we may, come to a very vivid discussion, but okay, this is my suggestion for this one. In this example, the monsters humorously represent character traits or typical behavior at home. This ABC book is at the same time a simple narrative of a bunny's day, but it is also a borderline case between fiction and non-fiction, while the little bunny is shown in its natural habitat. He is not anthropomorphized in any way, but there are only perhaps some elements which can be understood as fiction in the book, right? For instance, this sign elsewhere, right? This picture book is in fact an intellectual game with words. For example, the word pumpkin also embraces letters for words for fur coats and camel creation. So the image shows a combination of all these in one creature, right? Regarding the semiotic models of the picture book, it can be seen that 2 models, those of narrative and non-narrative picture books, cover all the other categories and their combinations. These 2 models are sufficient, and the quality of narrativity is superimposed to other pairs of categories. Now, the one but last section, narrative communication and rereading, of course. The communication of meanings in picture books can be understood more easily if we start from this widely known model of narrative communication in general. In it, real author and real reader, who are outside the narrative itself, communicate through the text of this narrative. The narrative embraces principles of unity and of readability, and, narrator and narratee as elements of the narrative discourse. It is just like that in picture books. Two discourses involve two voices and two receivers, narratees in this case. The role of the real reader is particularly important. Without the real reader, the story could not be completed. Real readers receive information through two narratives. Real readers actively reconstruct the story by establishing a dialogue. This is why picture books are metafictional by definition. The blending of the real reader and two narratives is mandatory to establish a dialogue between the narrators. Of course, there are other reasons as well, but I think this one is pretty strong and derived from its very semiotic model. Reading picture books is different from other reading experiences, as we could see in the previous slide. But this process is also marked by several other features which we will look into now. They are divided attention, interactivity and participation, repetition, and transmediation in reading. So, divided attention. The reader of picture books always needs to divide his or her attention between verbal and visual discourses. This can be frustrating for an impatient reader, but there is no help to it. So why does this happen? Because the two picture book discourses are separate and cannot be read simultaneously. This is also why the trajectory through the picture book is not set by the text, the voice, or the author, but by the real reader. It changes each time we read the picture book again. Reading is interactive and participative, and the reader combines information from different discourses to construct or reconstruct the meaning. Why is this so? Again, because the discourses are separate in picture books and the reader makes decisions during reading based on what the discourses offer. Repetition is crucial as the reader goes back to certain spots and explores different details. Picture books are also recursive, and readers often turn pages forwards and backwards, rearranging their order in reading. Why is this so? Because of the freedom to choose your path through the picture book, especially in rereadings. Transmediation is a term used by Lawrence Sipe to explain what is happening in the reader's journey through the picture book. The reader moves from verbal to visual discourse and back, gathering information and enriching each step, reinterpreting the old information with new understandings and details, building up the house of meaning. In rereading, this happens over and over again. Why? Because discourses are separate, not combined into one, like those in films, comics, or drama performances. I do hope we are now ready to provide answers to the questions set in the beginning. How many stories? One story, two discourses, and two narrators. How are narrative perspectives established? First of all, they belong to the narrator or to the voice. They're established by the narrator's or utterer's strategies. Perspectives often differ between the two discourses and often vary within individual discourses, and that is why picture books are polyphonic. How are meanings communicated? Separately by two voices of the respective discourses. They are received by narratees or utterees. They are reconstructed, connected, and united into a meaningful whole by the real reader. Why are picture books metafictional? Picture books are often self-referential, intertextual, and playful. But on top of that, they are metafictional because the reading process of picture books crosses the borderline between the real world and the picture book content. two voices, between two voices and the real reader. So, because the real reader blends with two narratees or utterees to enable the dialogue of two narrators or utterers. Why is rereading inevitable? Because of the specific semiotic structure of the picture book. It consists of two separate discourses, verbal and visual. Two separate voices tell the same story or convey the same topic in parallel. They need the real reader to establish a dialogue between them. Also, the reader can only finish the reading of a picture book after several rereadings, taking different trajectories through the picture book and exploring its discourses. Many have a circular structure. They send us back to the beginning when we finish reading, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly. And now let me show some examples of circular structure. So sometimes, as this one, when we read this picture book to the end, we are invited to literally turn it upside down and read towards the beginning. In the last spread of this picture book, we can see Joseph, a blend of the hero and his author, Sims, making the same picture book he appears in. The next reading is from a new perspective. A mouse is looking for a friend. When he finds one, another mouse, he escapes a real danger. Going back to the beginning, we discover a tale-telling dedication page we might have not noticed at first. A set of blocks is used to build a house, transform it into different vehicles, and to build the same house again. Or is it the same? Better go back to the beginning and check. And sometimes you can simply politely ask your readers to read again. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Smiljana. Wow, it was very interesting.
Thank you.
Very well prepared lecture. I think that we should listen 3 more times to to understand everything correctly. And now it seems that picture books are so much complicated that we even haven't expected. Wow. Okay, so now we have time for some comments, for discussion. I hope that there will be some questions from our audience, maybe some comments in the chat. Too many information, I think, for everybody.
Yes, well, I try to put it as simply as possible and to repeat certain things, but maybe there are some questions that may be raised upon this. For instance, are all picture books of this actually simple structure? Because when we put it to the basics, it's really very simple. Two separate discourses in the semiotic model cause all these phenomena surrounding picture books. And maybe we can ask ourselves, what about, for instance, black and white? Is it really two discourses? Of course it is not. But picture book is flexible and it can multiply discourses. And there are many picture books which multiply either verbal or visual discourses. But the same thing happens all the time. They began separate between them. They do not combine a common one combined discourse. Yes.
I can see that we have a first person, Christina, who wants to to ask a question. So.
Yeah, I have no access to the chat, so that's why I have to ask in person. Thank you very much for your wonderful lecture and great presentation. I was thinking from one point about one case. I mean about wordless picture books. What about the narrative and the narrator in such a case? We have, I have an idea according to what you were talking about, but maybe you could comment on it. Where can you see here the narrator? How many of them, or what about the structure of such wordless picture books, which are now quite common? Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your question. And this is a really frequent question among picture book scholars. And I think we can more or less agree on this solution, so to say. Well, the wordless picture books, or picture books with very few words, are just a material which prompt the reader to produce words. So, and this really happens in reality, right? The visual text, the visual discourse is there ready for the reader to verbalize the events and what is going on. And in this case, the narrator as well, the verbal narrator, is prompted by the visual discourse, but is now blended with the reader again. So it's another, I mean, interesting phenomenon, because, the reader then picks and chooses and organizes the information. If you give a, 7 or 8 year old child a wordless picture book, many of them, especially if they're prone to verbalize, they would start telling you the story they see in this wordless picture book. So this is just the case, I would say, of a hidden discourse, of a hidden narrator. So it sort of somehow lies within the visual discourse and sort of is raised above it by the reader. Again, the role of the reader is huge, because only in that way, and it also frequently happens in this cooperative reading by an adult and a child, and so on and so on, and the conversation about the information in the picture books, and very often it is just the visual discourse, in fact, which prompts a lot of conversation and cooperation of intergenerational cooperation between readers of different age is also something then that happens and is encouraged with picture books. I hope this answers it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Would you agree to call such a narrative multiple narrative, and even multiple narrators in wordless picture book? Because I can see many paths, of narration. You were talking about the perspective. So in some books, I have here with me this wonderful book by Paweł Pawlak, Czarostatki Parodzieje, where we have so many narratives within the one page or the book that, I would like to introduce such a term. What do you think about it, multiple narrative?
Yes, I think that a multiplication of stories may happen, or levels may happen in any story, in any medium, not only in picture books, but I would tend to call these narrative sequences or narrative bits, or narrative segments within the main story. What we would get here, that there are very frequently some parallel stories that we follow in one picture book. For instance, the main story, and then there is a parallel story, which is more or less connected with this primary story. But it's still, okay, the question of the narrator may be a bit unresolved here, but usually the narrator can be given to another narrator in books which have embedded stories, right? So for instance, there is the first level narrator and then second level narrator character from the book, like grandfather tells a story to child characters in the book. And then we have, of course, another narrator. Of course, all the elements of picture books may multiply, right? But when we talk about one discourse, for instance, which includes many segments of stories, then visual narrator is capable of introducing these multiple segments of different or interrelated stories. And this is one of the strategies of the visual narrator, which they use very often. But I would prefer the term polyphonic. Okay. In this place, because these new segments of they may or may not bring new voices into the discourse, but they may use different perspectives. For instance, there is this wonderful picture book, Lily Takes a Walk. I don't know if you know this picture book. Mm-hmm. Lily Takes a Walk. It's about a girl who walks with her dog, right? And in the same page, we very frequently see both, we see three perspectives in the same spread sometimes. Mm. So we see the dog's perspective, we see the girl's perspective, and we see a zero focalization, non-restricted perspective. So we see all the scene. We see the girl's perspective, especially in words, because she says something, and then we see the dog's perspective, who sees ordinary things combined in such a way that he sees monsters. And we can see at the same time as readers, we can recognize what he sees because he's afraid of monsters. And we can see that this monster doesn't exist, sometimes does, sometimes doesn't, but it is just his perspective, how he sees it. So, you know, this repertoire of narrator strategies is huge, especially in the strategies of visual narration. Mm-hmm. And it is very intuitive, right? You can achieve the same effect by using different visual strategies. And picture book creators always surprise me at how inventive and creative they can be and how rewarding their picture books are.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina, for your questions, and Smiljana for your answers. We have a thank you in the chat from Nicola. Thank you for the lecture. So I'm not sure if you have access to the chat.
Okay, maybe.
Yes, we still have time for some more questions or comments.
Maybe my lecture was too confusing.
It was not. It was fantastic.
No, it was fantastic.
Lovely.
Yes. But we're still processing it. Yes, but we have a question from. I can see who's raising the hand.
Marina Di Marco.
Sorry.
Marina
Okay, Marina.
Okay. Hi. Thank you. Actually, I had questions as you were speaking, but you answered everything I thought at the second. But it was really interesting, and I think it's really interesting to think picture books from this point of view. I usually study poetry picture books in Latin America, so it was really rewarding for me also to see that you included poetry and its different ways of U-turns and as a different way of discourse, of verbal discourse. But I wanted to ask you, how do you think that this semiotic model understanding of picture books can help us in schools, both primary and secondary, can help us in, I don't know how to say it, sorry. How do picture books influence the way we can understand how children read and help them to learn to read better? I don't mean alphabetically, but it's really hard for children sometimes to understand a text, a verbal text with just verbal discourse. So I was wondering, do you think that picture books can help us in their process? Was it clear? Sorry for my English.
No, it's excellent. Thank you very much for this lovely question, and thank you for your nice words and your support. Well, I think that picture books are really invaluable in work with children and in developing their both verbal and visual literacy. But how can this model help us as teachers? Well, we are certainly not going to bring these explanations to the classroom, no way. But what we can learn from this model is that the reader of picture books has a huge freedom. And whenever researchers did field research into how children understand or read complex picture books, which adults usually said, this is too difficult for children. But it was always wrong. They were always wrong because children are free to choose and they adopt picture books. They may, leave aside the picture book, not want to have anything to do with it if they don't like it, if they don't feel it, if they don't connect with it. But generally, I think we should only let children explore picture books and let them make their own conclusions. And we can talk with them about picture books. Even before we read to them, or we can read once these verbal part. But we should, in my opinion, we should just encourage them to explore, and we should talk with them about what they see, what they notice. They always notice something that you don't even think about. You will see that, and this is something we should appreciate in children, I think. And then this conversation can really help them widen their vocabulary and understand the tiny differences in meanings when you use words, and so on and so on. And as we all actually reread picture books, I'll share one of my childhood experiences with you now, which is really closely related to this question. Well, a picture book helped me learn how to read on my own. Nobody wanted to teach me how to read because I was 5. No, they just read a picture book to me. It had some text, and I still remember some sentences from this picture book in my head, because I learned the whole text by heart as I was listening to everyone rereading it to me. Yes. And nobody had this intention of teaching me anything, but they just spent time with me, read me a book, and so on. And all at once, I remember this. I opened this book and I started telling myself the text that I knew by heart. And all of a sudden, just things clicked. And I could see the print and understand and connect it. Now, of course, I don't think we should expect something like that from everyone, but definitely when you read and reread and mention some words and especially exclamations and so on, gradually, I shouldn't push anything with picture books, but I think there's really an invaluable material. So what we learn from this model in regard to classroom or our own children is give them freedom and have confidence in them. And don't push things. Don't give them something they don't want to do, right? And it can't fail. You know, and besides, there may be some things that children would not, because picture books are very frequently intended for dual audience, right, for adults. And there are very frequently some, so to say, adult jokes, you know, which simply not adult jokes in this pejorative sense, but jokes which adults could recognize and understand because of their experience and knowledge the children might not have yet. But for instance, when you see a photograph of Freud in the picture book, you don't expect your 5 or 7-year-old to recognize it. But you are not entitled to explain, you know, this is Freud and he was a famous psychologist. No, leave it aside. Don't mention it. Have fun because of it, you know, and enjoy it. And then the child will grow. And as I said, picture books and good children's literature grows with children. And then one day, when they come across this picture, they say, oh, gee, I've seen Freud in one of my childhood picture books, you know? So you will sort of develop towards its different meanings. And the nice thing about picture books is they always remain a bit enclosed. They frequently always have something new to offer, even in some very simple picture books. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I was also thinking that this can also teach us the value of rereading, right? Because nowadays everything is easily thrown away. And Marie Kondo says we can only have 30 books, which is very few books. So remembering how valuable it is to reread and take your time and consider how you were when you first read it and how you are now that you're reading it again, is also very valuable, I think. Well, thank you very much. I love your answer.
Thank you too. I agree that rereading is very important and very beneficial, but in picture books, it is compulsory. So it is part of their definition. That's the difference. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Yes, rereading. Yes, we are tired when we listen again and again that we have to read the same book to our children. But as you said, it's very, very important. So
yes, especially when they can start reading and rereading themselves, they will be rereading even without words. I mean.
Yes. And then they pretend that they can read when they are like 4 or 5 years old. So it could be a good. It could be funny to observe this. And Smiljana, I have a question. It's not strictly connected to the topic of your lecture, but in your presentation, you had some examples of Croatian picture books from the beginning of the 20th century. And I was really, really surprised. Can you tell me, could you explain us that if Croatian picture books have such long history?
Yes, maybe my colleague Berislav, who is here among us, is a better person to answer this question because he's really an expert. But I think I can answer this question too, and I kindly ask him to correct me if I'm wrong. But in any case, the fully Croatian picture books appeared only about 1920s. These were the first picture books that were created by Croatian visual and verbal artists, or whatever we would say. But the picture books were published in Croatia earlier. Very frequently, you had illustrations imported from abroad, and then these illustrations were combined with some Croatian text by someone. but the first the first picture books in Croatian language were appeared even earlier. For instance, the best example is Croatia was a part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. And we had a printing press in Zagreb since the 18th century. So like a printing press and a bookshop. And at a certain period, people came to Croatia and opened their printing presses here. So, for instance, the Austrian printer Tratner and so on, they were based also in Zagreb. And they would then publish picture books which were imported. Sometimes they were bilingual, but they were mostly translations, or the little Bible in pictures, which was compiled for the whole empire and was published in different languages, also existed in Croatia, and so on and so on. So the Croatian readership encountered picture books rather early, maybe even in the 18th and definitely in the 19th century. Yes, definitely in the 18th. I'm sorry, in the in the mid 19th century, definitely, but maybe even before, but from imported picture books or printed in Croatia, but still not fully Croatian picture books. Okay.
Thank you very much. And
you explained it wonderfully, Smiljana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And how was the situation after the Second World War? And because in Poland we had this Polish School of Illustration, but picture books were not the main genre. And weren't very appreciated in Poland, and they started to be published in bigger numbers in the 21st century, when the small publishers appeared on the Polish publishing market. Was the situation similar in your country?
Well, I'm not sure. Thank you for your question. I'm not sure it was really very similar. I would say that in the 30s, for instance, and during the Second World War, we had a pretty significant production of picture books of all kinds, and some very luxury ones, and so on and so on. And after the Second World War, when we became a part of Second Yugoslavia, right? Many of those picture books from the previous period simply disappeared from circulation, and picture books were largely used for propaganda, right? There were lots of picture books with pioneers and about Tito, the President Tito, the Communist Party, about pioneers who built houses, pioneers who, I don't know, who were foresters, and the character of a child warrior was developed, and then later on, as in other children's literature in Croatia at the time, and but picture books started really developing further. They were published, they were available, only they were not very expensive, so to say. They were cheap material, and lots of them are now lost. But thematically, what dominated for young children were picture books based on, pioneers, communism, and these things. Only about 60s, we started developing interest, and publishers started publishing more picture books of different topics of childhood play and so on and so on. And then, of course, from 60s on, we got the whole, then we also imported lots of those picture books from abroad, which were rather popular material, not so much artistic, achievements. Yes, we had many picture books, but the turn of the ideology was visible.
Yes, it's understandable. In socialist countries, we all experienced this, I think. Okay, thank you so much for your answer. And I will check the chat if we have any.
I don't see it actually. I don't know why.
No questions in the chat, and I can't see any raised hands.
Okay.
The last chance for ask a question.
So, Smiljana, thank you once again for this wonderful talk. Really, it was so informative. I've learned a lot, and I'm a huge fan of your publication. So I will for sure watch it again when it's available on our YouTube channel. Yes. And unfortunately, all of the questions which I had have already been answered. So I took some notes. And first, Christina, then Marina, and then finally Ella. You answered you addressed all of the questions which I had. There's just this one last question, which is like a completely random one. It is in a way connected to your fantastic talk, but it's not that relevant, in comparison to the other fantastic questions. So I've been thinking about the relationship between picture books and graphic novels. Would you say that all of the theoretical things that you've said, the theoretical background, can be applied in the analyses of graphic novels or like comic books? I know that the notion of the graphic novel is already quite problematic. So graphic novels, comic books. So what do you think about it?
Okay, thank you so much for this wonderful question. Now, this is a very important question, in my opinion. And I've studied the theoreticians of comics and graphic novels quite a lot when I was developing this concept. And what the comic scholars, the comic creators insist on is the sequential nature of comics. For instance, Will Eisner, who is one of the first of those who actually defined the notion of graphic novel, has also insisted on this mixed combined discourse and sequential nature of the comics. So this is the main difference between comics and picture books, I think. This situation in picture book, that discourses are separate and they need the reader to combine them. Well, also, when you read picture books, you choose your trajectory. You go forward and backwards. You don't follow the line which is set for you by the text, as it happens in graphic novels, in films, in novels, after all. Okay, you start reading, it's linear in a way. So are comics in a way. I know there are borderline cases. There definitely are borderline cases between picture book and graphic novels, but it's the nature of picture books and graphic novels, perhaps. But, this combination of a visual and verbal discourse into one combined discourse in comics and in graphic novels, which you can go through in one linear reading, right? And basically, the graphic novel is not the kind of book which for which rereading is mandatory. It often happens because we want to repeat our experience, we want to study the details and so on, but we can just as easily read it through and leave it aside, just like a novel, if you know what I mean. And the theoreticians of graphic novels that I have read usually all agree about this sequential nature and linear organization of narrative information. But there is another phenomenon which appeared in more recent times, and this is a special kind of novel, illustrated novel, in which illustrations take on parts of narration. And I've been studying this as well. Of course, the best known example is the Hugo Cabret, the Adventures, or whatever is the title, you know which book I mean now, the book in which you have first some novelistic pages with verbal text only, and then you shift to visual discourse, which does not illustrate the verbal text, but goes on with narration, visual narration. So where verbal and visual narration exchange. Or for instance, some of Philip Pullman's early novels, which are not that well known, for instance, I Was a Rat, or The Case of a Glass Slipper, or I don't know, Lord Carstein, and Count Karlstein, and even Clockwork. Yeah, these are new kinds of format, I would say, which are definitely taking something from picture books and something from graphic novels and comics. So it is an open field, I think. But I distinguish between comics and picture books more or less clearly, I think. I don't know whether I have answered your question.
I think that you have. Oh,
thank you.
Am I still frozen? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that you've not only answered in a way my question, but you've also given me lots of things to think about. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And I ask you this question because recently I have published a paper with my colleague, Sylvia Kamis-Kamachon, about picture books by this fantastic Ukrainian writer, illustrator, Oksana Bula. And her latest book is, in our opinion, a picture book, but she calls it a graphic novel.
Okay.
And I remember that while working on this paper, we didn't know what to do with it, because for us, it's a picture book with some graphic novel elements, but for the author and for the publisher, it's a graphic novel. So that's why I was inspired to ask you this question. So thank you so much for answering it.
Yes, but if I could just add something to it. Thank you so much for this. And there are several authors who actually do sort of dance on this borderline between graphic novels and comics and picture books, and some cases are really undecided, right? Take, for instance, The Arrival, for instance, which, I mean, has so many elements of graphic novel and so many elements of a picture book and so on and so on. But okay, but I would like to quote Scott McCloud. I don't know if you're familiar with his work on comics.
Of course.
Right? Yeah, so, sure. And I remember one of his sentences when he commented on, just give me a second, on a picture book, a British picture book author, When the Wind Blows. Oh gosh, now it's one of the major ones and I can't remember his name. Somebody help me. Clown. No. Father Christmas. Briggs. Of course, Raymond.
Yes, Raymond Briggs.
Okay.
Briggs.
And then he said that Raymond Briggs was too ashamed to say that he was making graphic novels, so he sold them as picture books. And this is, I think, a very nice sentence, which very well describes this problem of the border area between picture books and novel. So Briggs actually said he was making picture books, while in fact he was making graphic novels, according to Scott McCloud. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mateusz. Have we got any other questions to Smiljana? If no, I think that Christina is here again.
Just one request for the organizers to organize a lecture by Smiljana, another lecture about graphic novels, because I have lots to say about it. And Mateusz, this time you also took my question. Yeah, I was really interested in it. I didn't want to. Yeah, and I'm just writing the paper about the graphic novel, the adaptation of Anne of Green Gables, by the way. And I'm reading all this literature, secondary literature. So I'm really interested in the subjects. Another lecture, please.
Okay. Thank you for this note, although I have not yet published on. I had studied this hybrid phenomenon of novel picture book concoction, but okay, if you're interested, why not? There is a lot of time ahead. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We were so happy that you agreed to give another lecture.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about it. Thank you for the suggestion in any case. And it's so nice of you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think that we're going to finish our today's meeting. Yes. Thank you, Smiljana. It was a real honor to have you here tonight, and your lecture was really, really amazing, as Mateusz already said, so informative that we have to, as I said, we have to process this and come back and watch it once or twice or even more times again. Thank you so much, and I would like to invite all of our guests to our next lecture. Our next speaker will be Krystyna Zabawa, who was here today with us.